Hello everyone, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to our main character. The cruelest jokes are often told just seconds before destiny changes everything. Abigail Brooks balanced a silver tray loaded with crystal glasses as she slipped between tables inside Romano House, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Chicago. Friday night had transformed the dining room into a sea of tailored tuxedos, designer gowns, polished marble floors, and golden chandeliers reflecting warm light across every smiling face except hers. At 28, Abigail had learned to smile before anyone expected her to apologize for taking up space. She wasn't graceful. She wasn't glamorous. She was simply kind, and somehow that had never seemed fashionable among people who measured worth by waistlines and last names. She adjusted the loose strand of blonde hair that had escaped her ponytail and whispered to herself, "Just make it through another shift." It had become a ritual, almost like a lucky charm. A little boy sitting near the window waved enthusiastically at her. Abigail answered with an exaggerated royal bow that made him burst into laughter while his exhausted mother mouthed a grateful thank you. Moments like that reminded her why she loved serving people despite everything else. She turned toward the center of the room carrying a fresh bottle of sparkling water when the restaurant doors opened. Vanessa Whitmore entered first, surrounded by social media influencers, photographers, and wealthy friends who treated every dinner like a red carpet event. Her white designer dress shimmered beneath the lights while conversations throughout the room faded into admiring whispers. Abigail recognized her immediately. Everyone did. Vanessa had built an empire convincing millions of followers that perfection could be purchased one luxury product at a time. The hostess quickly escorted the party toward the best table in the restaurant. Abigail inhaled slowly and walked over with practiced professionalism. "Good evening. Welcome to Romano House," she said warmly. Before she could finish placing the glasses, someone from another table backed into her shoulder. The tray tilted. One crystal glass slid across polished silver, bounced once, and spilled sparkling water across Vanessa's expensive handbag. The dining room froze. Abigail's eyes widened. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, grabbing a linen napkin. Vanessa stepped backward as if Abigail had contaminated the air itself. She glanced down at the tiny droplets before lifting her gaze with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Seriously?" she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Do they hire anyone now?" Several guests chuckled. Abigail reached forward carefully. "Please let me replace it." Vanessa pulled the bag away. "Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time paying attention, this wouldn't happen." Laughter rolled across the room, louder this time. One influencer quietly raised a phone, pretending to check messages while recording everything. Abigail felt dozens of eyes settle on her. Heat climbed into her cheeks, yet she kept her hands steady. "It was an accident," she said softly. Vanessa folded her arms. "No, it was carelessness." Another guest added, "She probably blocks half the aisle." More laughter followed. Abigail looked down for only a second before forcing herself to meet Vanessa's gaze again. She refused to cry where strangers could turn tears into entertainment. At the far end of the restaurant, a black luxury sedan had just arrived outside. Security stepped aside without speaking. A tall man wearing a charcoal suit entered with measured confidence. Tattoos disappeared beneath his collar before winding subtly along his jawline and hands. Every movement carried quiet authority rather than intimidation. Luca Moretti scanned the room once, immediately noticing that nobody was eating anymore. Every face pointed toward the young waitress standing alone beneath the chandelier while laughter echoed around her. His eyes rested on Abigail for one silent heartbeat, then shifted to the crowd surrounding her. Without a trace of urgency, he removed his suit jacket, handed it to his bodyguard, and began walking directly toward the center of the restaurant. The laughter faded one voice at a time as Luca Moretti crossed the dining room without changing his pace. Nobody announced his arrival. Nobody needed to. Conversations simply dissolved the closer. He came, replaced by the quiet awareness that the most influential man in the room had noticed something everyone else wished he had ignored. Abigail stood frozen beside the overturned glass, still clutching the damp linen napkin. She had never spoken to Luca Moretti before, although every employee knew his face. Romano House belonged to one of the many legitimate businesses carrying the Romano name, and stories about its mysterious owner traveled through every kitchen and hallway. Some described him as ruthless. Others claimed he never raised his voice because he never needed to. Abigail had always dismissed the gossip. Powerful men rarely noticed waitresses. Luca stopped beside the table, his calm blue eyes moving from the puddle of water to Vanessa's designer handbag before finally settling on Abigail's embarrassed expression. His voice remained steady. Did anyone get hurt? The question surprised everyone. Vanessa forced a polished smile. Only my handbag. Luca looked at the soaked leather for less than a second. Then it can be replaced. Vanessa laughed awkwardly, expecting him to join her. He did not. Instead, he turned toward the restaurant manager, who had hurried across the room wearing the anxious expression of someone expecting disaster. Mr. Harris, Luca said evenly, would you explain why one of your employees is standing alone while an entire dining room watches her apologize for an accident? The manager swallowed hard. Sir, I was just about to handle the situation. Luca nodded slightly. Good. Handle it fairly. His attention returned to Abigail. What is your name? She blinked, surprised he had asked instead of assuming someone else would answer for her. Abigail Brooks, sir. How long have you worked here, Abigail? Almost 3 years. Have you ever received a complaint before tonight? She looked toward the manager, who answered first. Never, sir. She is one of our most dependable servers. Lucas studied her face for another quiet moment. He noticed the way she held herself despite the humiliation, shoulders tense yet refusing to collapse. She reminded him of old oak trees that bent during storms without breaking. Then tonight. Changes nothing, he said simply. Finish your shift. Abigail stared at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. Vanessa stepped forward before the silence could settle. Surely you are not ignoring what happened. Luca faced her with the same composed expression. No, I am choosing not to exaggerate it. A few guests lowered their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their dinner plates. Vanessa crossed her arms. Public image matters, Mr. Moretti. Character matters more. The sentence landed softly, yet nobody challenged it. Without another word, Luca returned to his reserved table near the windows overlooking the Chicago River. His bodyguard quietly placed the jacket across the back of his chair before stepping away again. The restaurant slowly breathed back to life, forks touching porcelain and conversations returning in cautious whispers. Abigail released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Her hands still trembled as she collected the broken glass, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in years, someone with real influence had looked directly at her instead of through her. Across the room, Luca unfolded the evening menu without ordering a single item. His attention drifted toward the reflection in the window where he could still see Abigail helping another elderly couple with the same gentle smile she had worn before the embarrassment. He had expected resentment. Instead, she offered kindness to strangers who had done nothing to earn it. That puzzled him far more than the accident ever could, and for the first time in a very long while, dinner was no longer the reason he had decided to stay. Abigail finished the remainder of her shift with the strange feeling that every pair of eyes followed her for a different reason than before. Some customers offered polite smiles. Others whispered behind raised menus. A few looked embarrassed, as though they had suddenly remembered laughing only minutes earlier. She ignored them all. Experience had taught her that people often change their expressions long before they change their hearts. Near midnight, the last reservation finally departed, leaving only the soft hum of dishwashers and the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the nearly empty restaurant. Abigail tied a trash bag, stretched her aching back, and laughed quietly after realizing she had somehow managed to tuck a dinner roll into the pocket of her apron instead of the breadbasket. Well, she muttered to herself, holding up the slightly flattened roll. I guess tomorrow's breakfast just volunteered. The dishwasher, an older man named Frank, chuckled as he passed by. Only you could accidentally pack your own lunch before going home. Abigail grinned and tossed the bread into her bag. Efficiency is a gift. The light-hearted exchange faded when Mr. Harris appeared at the kitchen entrance. His face revealed nothing, which somehow made Abigail even more nervous. Mr. Moretti would like to see you before you leave. Her smile disappeared. Every cook nearby suddenly found an urgent reason to polish spotless countertops. Abigail swallowed. Did I do something wrong? Mr. Harris shook his head. He did not say. He only asked if you could spare 5 minutes. 5 minutes with a man whose reputation filled newspaper headlines and whispered conversations sounded far longer than 5 minutes. She wiped her hands carefully, smoothed the wrinkles from her black uniform, and followed the quiet hallway leading toward the private dining suite overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered across the dark water beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Chicago into a sea of gold and silver reflections. Luca stood alone beside the glass with one hand resting lightly in his pocket. His suit jacket remained draped over a chair, while the sleeves of his crisp white shirt revealed intricate tattoos winding across his forearms. He looked more like a businessman studying tomorrow's market than the mysterious figure people endlessly speculated about. Without turning around, he spoke. "You stayed after your shift." Abigail blinked. There was cleaning left to finish. He finally faced her. "Most people would have rushed home after tonight." She shrugged gently. "Bills do not disappear because someone embarrassed you." The corner of Luca's mouth lifted almost invisibly. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough to surprise even him. "Honest answer." Abigail folded her hands together. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Luca walked toward the dining table where 2 untouched cups of hot chocolate waited instead of coffee. "Sit down." She hesitated. "Employees are not supposed to sit in this room. Tonight you are my guest." Abigail lowered herself cautiously into the chair, staring at the mug in front of her. "You remembered I do not drink coffee?" Luca took his seat across from her. 3 years of invoices. Hot chocolate appears on your employee meal almost every Friday. Abigail looked genuinely confused. "You read employee meal reports?" "No." He paused briefly. "I remember details." She wrapped both hands around the warm cup, smiling despite herself. "That is either impressive or slightly terrifying." A quiet laugh escaped Luca before he could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. Abigail raised one eyebrow. "There it is." "What?" "Proof that everyone exaggerates. They said you never laugh." Luca looked down at the steam rising from his cup. "They are usually correct." Silence settled for only a moment, but this time it felt comfortable instead of awkward. Then Luca slid a simple business card across the polished table. "Tomorrow morning, I am opening a new restaurant on the north side. I want you to work there." Abigail stared at the card without touching it. Her heartbeat quickened. "Because you feel sorry for me?" Luca's expression grew thoughtful. He held her gaze steadily before answering. "No, Abigail. Because I think everyone else has underestimated you. The question is, have you underestimated yourself?" Abigail did not touch the business card until Luca quietly stood and walked toward the window again, giving her space instead of waiting for an answer. That simple gesture unsettled her more than any speech could have. Most powerful people expected immediate gratitude. He expected honesty. She finally picked up the card, reading the elegant lettering beneath the restaurant's name. It was located on the north side of Chicago, nearly 40 minutes from her apartment by train. Better neighborhood, better customers, better pay. If the rumors about Romano restaurants were true. Still, something inside her refused to celebrate too quickly. She looked up carefully. "People are going to think I only got this because you stepped in tonight." Luca rested one hand against the glass, watching traffic drift across the bridge below. "People will always think something." His voice remained calm. "You cannot build your life around conversations you were never invited into." Abigail let out a small breath that almost became a laugh. That sounded suspiciously wise. He glanced back over his shoulder. "Experience usually is." She folded the card into her apron pocket instead of her purse. "Can I think about it?" "I would be disappointed if you did not." The answer surprised her. She had expected pressure. Instead, she found patience. As she stood to leave, her foot caught the leg of the heavy chair. She stumbled forward with an embarrassed gasp, instinctively reaching for the nearest solid object. Unfortunately, that object happened to be Luca's shoulder. They both froze for a heartbeat before Abigail immediately stepped back, covering her face with both hands. "I am so sorry. I swear gravity has a personal problem with me." Luca looked down at the slight wrinkle now running across his shirt sleeve before meeting her horrified expression. "Then gravity owes me a new shirt." Abigail stared at him in disbelief until she realized he was teasing. A nervous laugh escaped before she could stop it. Luca found himself smiling more openly than before. "There it is again," she said, pointing at him. That thing where your face suddenly remembers how happiness works. He shook his head once, amused despite himself. Good night, Abigail. Good night, and thank you. She left the private dining room, carrying far more questions than answers. Outside, cool autumn air brushed against her cheeks as she walked toward the train station with her worn backpack resting against one shoulder. She reached her small apartment just after 1 in the morning. The building was old but welcoming, filled with neighbors who borrowed sugar instead of judging each other's lives. Her widowed mother, Linda, had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for her, a half-finished crossword puzzle resting on her lap. Abigail quietly covered her with a blanket before placing the business card on the kitchen counter. The tiny piece of paper seemed strangely heavy. Across the city, inside a modern penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Luca removed his watch and loosened his tie while his longtime advisor, Matteo Ricci, entered carrying a tablet. We finished the background check, Matteo said. Abigail Brooks. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No unpaid taxes. She works 2 jobs, volunteers twice a month at a neighborhood food pantry, and spends every Sunday with her mother. Luca listened without interrupting. Matteo raised one eyebrow. You usually do not ask for reports on waitresses. She is not just a waitress. Matteo waited. Luca looked toward the lights stretching across the shoreline. She kept smiling after an entire room laughed at her. That is not weakness. Matteo nodded slowly. Vanessa Whitmore has already posted about tonight. Luca accepted the tablet. Thousands of comments filled the screen beneath a carefully edited video that showed only Abigail spilling the water, cutting away before anyone saw what happened afterward. The headline read, "Some people should never work in fine dining." The view count was climbing by the second. Luca's expression hardened, not with anger, but with quiet concern. Somewhere across the city, Abigail's phone vibrated on her nightstand as hundreds of strangers who had never met her began sharing an opinion that could change her life before sunrise. Abigail woke before sunrise to the relentless buzz of notifications echoing across her nightstand. She rubbed her eyes, expecting another reminder about overdue utility bills or her weekend volunteer shift. Instead, dozens of unfamiliar names filled her screen. Some mocked her appearance. Others replayed the short video again and again, each comment crueler than the last. Someone had frozen the exact moment she lost her balance, turning an accident into entertainment for hundreds of thousands of strangers. She quietly locked the phone before her mother could see it. Linda stepped into the kitchen wearing fuzzy slippers and smiled as if nothing in the world had changed. Good morning, sweetheart. I made blueberry pancakes. Abigail forced a cheerful smile. Perfect timing. I accidentally packed a dinner roll for breakfast yesterday, so this is definitely an upgrade. Linda laughed, unaware that Abigail had already spent 10 minutes deleting hateful messages before breakfast. While washing dishes, Abigail glanced toward the business card still resting beside the fruit bowl. Luca's offer suddenly felt less like an opportunity and more like a lifeboat. Across the city, Romano Hospitality headquarters had already begun its morning executive meeting. Financial reports filled the conference table while department heads discussed expansion plans. Luca listened without interruption until the marketing director nervously cleared her throat. There is one issue we should address. Vanessa Whitmore's video has reached over 2 million views overnight. Some clients are asking whether the waitress still works for us. Luca closed the folder in front of him. Does the video show the entire incident? No. Then they are discussing fiction, not facts. The room fell silent. Another executive carefully suggested, perhaps we should release a statement distancing the company from the employee until public attention fades. Luca looked directly at him. You believe abandoning loyal employees improves our reputation? Nobody answered. Our reputation depends on how we treat people when it is inconvenient. He stood, straightened his cuff, and ended the meeting with one quiet sentence. Prepare the Northside restaurant for tomorrow's opening. Abigail Brooks will decide for herself whether she wishes to join us. Meanwhile, Abigail arrived for another shift at Romano House, expecting whispers. She received them. Several customers recognized her immediately. A young couple politely requested another server after noticing her. A businessman openly compared her appearance to the comments online while pretending she could not hear him. Abigail inhaled slowly, repeated her familiar reminder to keep moving, and continued serving each table with the same patience she had always shown. During the lunch rush, she carried a tray stacked with fresh desserts through the dining room. A little girl wearing pink glasses waved excitedly from a corner booth. Abigail smiled and playfully balanced the tray with one hand before making an exaggerated superhero pose. The little girl giggled so hard that chocolate milk nearly came out of her nose. Her father laughed too, thanking Abigail for cheering up his daughter before a difficult hospital appointment. She curtsied dramatically and replied, "Every superhero deserves cheesecake." Even the neighboring table smiled. Hidden near the entrance, Luca had witnessed the exchange while stopping by for an unannounced inspection. He noticed something no viral video could capture. Abigail carried other people's burdens almost as naturally as she carried dinner plates. She made frightened children laugh, remembered regular customers by name, and treated wealthy executives exactly the same as tired construction workers. As she turned toward the kitchen, her shoe caught a loose floor mat. The tray tilted dangerously. Before she could recover, a steady hand reached out and caught the edge beside hers. Their eyes met for only a moment before both looked down at the perfectly balanced desserts. Abigail sighed dramatically. Gravity is becoming embarrassingly committed to this rivalry. Luca released the tray without taking his eyes off her. Perhaps gravity simply wants another chance to introduce us. She laughed despite the exhausting day, unaware that someone standing near the entrance had quietly captured the entire moment with a phone before slipping outside to send the recording directly to Vanessa Whitmore. The short video spread across social media faster than anyone inside Romano House could have imagined. Unlike the first recording, this one showed Luca catching the dessert tray before it crashed onto the marble floor. It also captured Abigail laughing at his comment about gravity, her cheeks turning pink while his usually unreadable face softened for a brief moment. The internet immediately filled the silence with its own story. Headlines appeared within hours. Billionaire Mafia heir falls for viral waitress. Beauty and the Beast? More like money and desperation. Thousands argued over whether the moment had been genuine or carefully staged. Abigail did not discover any of it until her afternoon break. She opened her phone expecting another message from her mother and instead found reporters requesting interviews, strangers offering cruel opinions, and complete strangers claiming she had planned everything for attention. Her smile slowly disappeared. She locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her apron before anyone noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. She refused to let another dining room watch her cry. Upstairs in a private office overlooking the restaurant, Matteo placed a tablet on Luca's desk without saying a word. Luca watched the replay only once before setting the device aside. It was inevitable, Matteo observed quietly. People enjoy writing stories about moments they never witnessed. Luca leaned back in his chair. Find the person who recorded it. Matteo nodded. Already done. A freelance photographer hired by Vanessa Whitmore's media company. Luca remained silent for several seconds. Instead of anger, disappointment crossed his face. She is creating a storm around someone who never asked for attention. Should we respond publicly? Matteo asked. Luca shook his head. Not yet. Truth does not become stronger because it speaks first. Downstairs, the lunch crowd had doubled after news of the viral video reached local television stations. Customers filled booths hoping to catch another interaction between Luca and the waitress everyone suddenly believed they knew. Abigail could feel cameras following her every movement. Every smile felt analyzed. Every step seemed judged. She accidentally placed iced tea in front of a customer who had ordered lemonade. Wrong table. The customer snapped impatiently. Abigail apologized immediately and replaced the drink within seconds. A teenager nearby laughed while secretly recording the mistake. She is doing it again, he whispered to his friends. Abigail pretended not to hear. During a brief pause near the kitchen entrance, Frank quietly handed her a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in a napkin. Emergency. Dessert, he said with a grin. Doctor's orders. Abigail smiled weakly. Do doctors usually prescribe cookies? Only for people carrying the weight of the whole internet. She laughed softly before breaking the cookie in half and sharing it with him. Neither realized another phone had captured that simple act of kindness as well. Later that evening, Luca walked through the dining room during closing hours. Abigail was carefully stacking chairs onto empty tables, moving slower than usual after an exhausting day. He stopped a few feet away. You have not accepted my offer. She lowered another chair. I have not decided whether following you would solve my problems or make them bigger. Luca considered her answer. Fair concern. Abigail looked toward the dark windows reflecting both of them standing in the quiet restaurant. Everywhere I go now, people stare. They think they know who I am because of 30 seconds on a screen. Luca answered calmly. People only see what is easy to judge. She searched his face. Does that ever stop? He hesitated, something she had never seen him do before. No. The honesty caught her off guard. Before she could reply, Mr. Harris hurried across the empty dining room, holding a printed letter in one trembling hand. Abigail, he said carefully. This arrived from corporate this evening. She unfolded the envelope with uncertain fingers. Her expression changed as she reached the final line. Effective immediately, she had been placed on unpaid administrative leave while the company reviewed the growing public controversy surrounding her employment. Slowly, Abigail lowered the letter. Across the room, Luca's eyes narrowed. He had never authorized that decision. The words on the letter refused to change no matter how many times Abigail read them. Unpaid administrative leave. Corporate review. Temporary suspension. Each sentence sounded carefully written, polite enough to avoid guilt, yet cold enough to erase 3 years of faithful work in less than half a page. She folded the paper with steady hands, thanked Mr. Harris for giving it to her personally, and quietly untied her apron. Abigail, Mr. Harris began clearly. Uncomfortable. I did not know this was coming. She offered him a tired smile. Neither did I. She placed her name tag on the front counter beside the register she had opened almost every morning for the past year. The tiny plastic badge suddenly looked much smaller than the memories attached to it. Frank stepped out of the kitchen, carrying his backpack. You are leaving already? He asked before noticing the expression on everyone's face. Abigail handed him a quick hug. Looks like I have an unexpected vacation. Frank forced a laugh that fooled no one. You better come back. Nobody else laughs at my terrible jokes. That sounds less like friendship and more like emotional blackmail. Even then she managed to make him smile. Luca remained standing several feet away, watching her choose grace over anger. The moment the front doors closed behind the other employees, he walked toward Mr. Harris and calmly held out his hand. May I see the letter? After reading only the first paragraph, he looked at the signature. It belonged to a regional executive who reported to someone that ultimately reported to him. I did not approve this, Luca said quietly. Mr. Harris nodded. I know, sir. The order came directly from headquarters before anyone could contact you. Luca folded the paper once before handing it back. Who contacted headquarters? Matteo entered almost at the same moment, carrying another tablet. We traced several phone calls made this afternoon, he said. One came from Vanessa Whitmore's public relations director to the regional office. Luca understood immediately. No threats, no illegal pressure, just fear of bad publicity carefully planted in the right ears. It was an elegant move because it forced ordinary executives to protect the company's image before protecting one employee. Across the city, Abigail rode the train home surrounded by strangers who occasionally looked up from their phones and then glanced toward her face. She lowered her baseball cap and watched the neighborhoods pass outside the window. When she finally reached her apartment building, she did not go inside immediately. Instead, she walked 2 extra blocks toward the neighborhood food pantry where she volunteered every Wednesday evening. Mrs. Ramirez, the 70-year-old coordinator, looked surprised to see her arrive early. I thought you were working tonight. Abigail shrugged gently. Schedule changed. She spent the next 2 hours organizing canned food, helping children choose cereal, and carrying grocery bags to elderly neighbors waiting outside. She never mentioned losing her job. She simply kept smiling whenever someone thanked her. A little boy accidentally dropped an entire box of macaroni across the sidewalk. Abigail knelt beside him and whispered dramatically, Quick, we have exactly 30 seconds before the noodle monsters escape. The boy burst into laughter as they gathered every single box together. Standing across the street inside a parked black sedan, Luca watched the scene through the windshield. He had followed only to make sure she arrived home safely after reading the suspension notice. Instead, he found her spending an evening helping people when she had every reason to stay home feeling sorry for herself. Matteo looked over from the driver's seat. Should I tell her you are here? Luca slowly shook his head. Not tonight. His eyes remained fixed on Abigail as she helped an elderly veteran carry groceries toward a weathered apartment building. Some people reveal who they are when life becomes easy, Luca said softly. She reveals herself when life becomes unfair. Just then Abigail reached into her pocket to answer her ringing phone. The smile disappeared from her face almost instantly. "What do you mean my mother's insurance was denied?" she whispered, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk while the grocery bag slowly slipped from her hand. Abigail stood perfectly still as the evening traffic rushed past her, the grocery bag resting against her leg while the voice from the insurance company continued speaking through her phone. "I understand your concern, Ms. Brooks, but the appeal was denied this afternoon. Your mother's physical therapy sessions are no longer covered under her current plan." Abigail closed her eyes for one brief moment. "There has to be a mistake." The representative sighed. Sympathetically, "I wish there were. You may submit another appeal, but the review process could take 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. Linda did not have 6 to 8 weeks before missing treatments would begin affecting her recovery. Abigail thanked the representative anyway, ended the call, and remained silent long enough for the city noise to swallow the sound of her breathing. She bent down, picked up the grocery bag, and forced herself to keep walking. From across the street, Luca noticed the difference immediately. She had smiled through public humiliation, internet ridicule, and losing her job, yet one phone call had stolen every trace of light from her face. Something changed, Matteo observed quietly. Luca nodded once, not taking his eyes off Abigail. "Find out what happened." Less than 20 minutes later, Matteo returned after making several discreet calls. Her mother's insurance claim was denied. Therapy will stop unless they pay privately. Luca remained silent for several seconds before asking one simple question. "How much?" Matteo glanced at his notes. "Less than what this car costs to detail every month." Luca looked out the windshield again. Money always seems smallest to the people who have it and largest to the people who need it. Meanwhile, Abigail reached home carrying groceries in one hand and worry in the other. Linda looked up from the living room sofa with her usual warm smile. "You are late. Did they keep you busy?" Abigail quietly placed the bags on the kitchen counter before turning around with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Actually, I think I accidentally became unemployed." Linda blinked twice before realizing her daughter was trying to make a joke. Abigail walked over, wrapped her mother in a hug, and rested her chin gently on Linda's shoulder. "It is going to be okay. I just need a few days to figure things out." Linda pulled back enough to study her daughter's face. "You are smiling too hard." Abigail laughed softly. "Is that even possible?" "Only when you are hiding something." Before Abigail could answer, another knock echoed through the apartment. She frowned. Almost nobody visited without calling first. Opening the door, she found Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor from downstairs, struggling with 2 heavy shopping bags. "Honey, would you mind helping me carry these inside? My arthritis is winning today." Abigail forgot every problem for a moment. Of course. 5 minutes later, she had carried the groceries upstairs, changed a light bulb in Mrs. Jenkins's kitchen, fixed the older woman's television remote by replacing the batteries, and accepted exactly one homemade oatmeal cookie as payment after losing an amusing argument about whether kindness should be free. Back downstairs, Linda watched her daughter return with cookie crumbs on her sweater and a genuine smile replacing the forced one. "You spent 20 minutes helping someone else after everything that happened today." Abigail shrugged while pouring 2 glasses of iced tea. Mrs. Jenkins still needed help. Several blocks away, inside a quiet office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Vanessa Whitmore watched a private investigator's report appear on her tablet. It included photographs of Abigail volunteering, caring for neighbors, and supporting her mother. Vanessa tapped her fingers thoughtfully before smiling for the first time all day. "Interesting," she murmured. "She really is exactly who everyone thinks she is." Her assistant looked confused. "Is that a problem?" Vanessa slowly closed the file. "No. It means attacking her directly will only create sympathy." She looked out the window toward the glittering city lights. "If I want Luca Moretti to walk away from her, I will make sure she believes leaving him is the only way to save the people she loves." The next morning began with cautious hope. Abigail sat at the small kitchen table surrounded by handwritten numbers, unpaid bills, and a notebook filled with possible part-time jobs. She circled grocery stores, bookstores, bakeries, and coffee shops, quietly calculating how many hours she would need to replace the income she had lost. Linda watched from across the room without interrupting. Finally, she reached across the table and gently covered Abigail's hand. "You do not have to solve everything today." Abigail smiled faintly. "I know. I just have to solve enough to keep tomorrow from becoming worse." Before either of them could say another word, someone knocked at the apartment door. Abigail opened it expecting another neighbor. Instead, she found a professionally dressed courier holding a large white envelope. Delivery for Abigail Brooks. She accepted it with a puzzled expression. There was no company logo, no return address, only her name written in elegant handwriting. After the courier disappeared down the stairs, she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper confirming that every remaining physical therapy session for Linda Brooks had already been paid in full through the end of the year. Abigail read the letter twice before shaking her head. "This has to be a mistake." Linda adjusted her glasses and read it herself. "It says anonymous donor." Abigail immediately called the rehabilitation clinic. The receptionist happily confirmed the payment had cleared that morning. "Who paid it?" Abigail asked hopefully. "I am sorry, Ms. Brooks. The donor specifically requested complete privacy." After hanging up, she stood quietly by the window. There were only a handful of people who even knew about the insurance problem. Her thoughts drifted toward Luca before she immediately dismissed the idea. No, that would have been impossible. He could not have learned about the denial so quickly. Across town, Luca finished signing a stack of contracts inside his office when Matteo entered carrying fresh reports. The payment was processed anonymously exactly as requested. Luca nodded without looking up. "Good." Matteo hesitated. "She will probably figure out it was you." Luca placed his pen on the desk. "Perhaps. Why not simply tell her?" Matteo asked. Luca looked toward the skyline beyond the glass walls. "Because gratitude creates obligations. I would rather earn trust." Before Matteo could respond, another assistant entered carrying a tablet. "Sir, Vanessa Whitmore has announced a charity gala this Saturday. Nearly every major media outlet will be there." Luca accepted the tablet. The promotional image showed Vanessa smiling beneath the words celebrating compassion and community. He quietly studied the invitation before handing it back. She never organizes events without another purpose. Meanwhile, Abigail decided she could not spend another day waiting for life to happen. She put on her favorite blue sweater, gathered copies of her resume, and walked from one business to another asking if anyone needed help. Some managers politely promised to call. Others recognized her from the viral videos before awkwardly explaining that all positions had suddenly been filled. By late afternoon, her feet ached from miles of walking. As she left another restaurant after another rejection, a strong autumn breeze scattered the resumes from her folder across the sidewalk. "Seriously," she sighed. "Even the wind has opinions now." She hurried after the papers, chasing them between parked cars while laughing at the ridiculousness of the moment. A familiar black sedan slowed beside the curb. Before she could collect the final page, someone stepped out, picked it up carefully, and held it toward her. Abigail looked up into Luca's calm blue eyes. "You seem to have declared war on gravity again," he said. She accepted the resume with an embarrassed smile. "At this point, I think gravity is winning." Luca glanced at the folder in her hands, then at the help-wanted signs lining the street. "How many interviews today?" Abigail hesitated before answering honestly. 8. "Any offers?" She looked away toward the busy intersection. "Not unless disappointment counts as a career opportunity." Luca remained silent for a moment before extending a small envelope toward her. "Then allow me to make one more offer." Abigail frowned but did not reach for it. "If this is money, I cannot accept it." Luca shook his head gently. "It is not money." She slowly opened the envelope and found a formal invitation to Vanessa Whitmore's charity gala with her name printed beside his as his personal guest. Abigail's smile disappeared as she looked back at him. "Why would she ever want me there?" Luca's expression became unusually serious. "That," he answered quietly, "is exactly the question I have been asking myself." Abigail stared at the elegant invitation while the afternoon breeze tugged gently at the corner of the envelope. She looked from the embossed lettering back to Luca, searching for the hidden joke that never came. "You cannot be serious," she said quietly. "Half the people inside that ballroom have already laughed at me online." Luca slipped his hands into his coat pockets, his expression thoughtful rather than persuasive. Which is exactly why they expect you to stay away. Abigail looked down at her worn sneakers. Maybe they are right. He waited until she met his eyes again. Do you believe that? She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. For the first time in days, someone had asked what she believed instead of telling her who she was. After several silent seconds, she admitted, "No, I am just tired." Luca nodded with quiet understanding. Being tired is not the same as giving up. They began walking slowly down the sidewalk together without discussing where they were going. Chicago bustled around them with honking taxis, food carts, and office workers hurrying toward the train station. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. They stopped outside a small neighborhood bakery where fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air with warm sweetness. Abigail smiled despite herself. This place smells dangerous. Luca glanced toward the display window. Danger comes in many forms. She laughed softly. You sound like someone who has declared war on carbohydrates. Without another word, he opened the door. A few minutes later, they sat beside the front window sharing 2 oversized cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate instead of coffee. Abigail looked suspiciously at him. You remembered again. Yes. That memory of yours is becoming inconvenient. Only for people trying to remain strangers. She lowered her eyes, hiding another smile. For a little while the world outside seemed quieter. Abigail told him stories about volunteering at the food pantry, about Mrs. Jenkins insisting every problem could be solved with homemade cookies, and about accidentally locking herself inside the restaurant supply closet for almost an hour because she pushed a door that clearly said pull. Luca listened more. Then he spoke, but every so often a genuine laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Abigail noticed each one. There it is again, she teased. You are becoming almost approachable. He raised one eyebrow. Almost. Let us not rush things. Their laughter faded when Luca's phone vibrated. Matteo's name appeared on the screen. Luca answered quietly, listening without interruption. His expression remained controlled, but Abigail noticed the subtle tightening around his eyes. After ending the call, he looked toward the busy street. What happened? She asked. We confirmed something. He folded the phone into his pocket. The executive who suspended you received anonymous documents claiming you intentionally created those viral moments for publicity. Abigail stared in disbelief. Someone forged evidence? Yes. Can you prove it? Eventually. She leaned back in her chair, absorbing the news. So all of this, losing my job, strangers judging me, it was planned? Luca did not soften the truth. I believe someone wanted to isolate you before making the next move. Abigail slowly looked at the invitation resting on the table between them. Suddenly, it no longer felt like an opportunity. It felt like part of a much larger game. Before either of them could speak again, the television mounted above the bakery counter interrupted the afternoon talk show with breaking entertainment news. Vanessa Whitmore appeared smiling beside reporters while announcing a surprise charity auction. Then the host added one unexpected sentence. Sources confirm Vanessa has personally invited viral waitress Abigail Brooks to attend this weekend's gala as her honored guest. Every customer inside the bakery turned toward Abigail at exactly the same moment. For a few uncomfortable seconds, the entire bakery seemed to stop breathing. Customers who had been stirring coffee or reading newspapers now stared openly at Abigail before pretending they had not. She lowered her eyes toward the untouched cinnamon roll, wishing she could disappear into the wooden table. Luca calmly reached for the television remote resting beside the register and lowered the volume without asking anyone's permission. The sudden quiet felt almost protective. Abigail let out a slow breath. She planned that, she whispered. She wanted everyone to look at me before I even decided whether I was going. Luca nodded once. She is controlling the conversation before the event begins. Abigail folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I will not go. Luca studied her expression carefully. Is that your decision, or the one she hoped you would make? Abigail looked toward the bakery window where people hurried along the sidewalk carrying shopping bags and umbrellas, each stranger living a life completely separate from hers. I do not know anymore. Luca did not answer immediately. Instead, he waited until the silence belonged to neither of them. When someone tries to corner you, he said quietly, they usually leave only 2 obvious exits. The safest choice is often the third one they never imagined. Abigail smiled faintly. You always talk like you were solving chess puzzles. Life has fewer rules than chess. She laughed softly before shaking her head. You know, a week ago my biggest concern was whether I could carry 4 soup bowls at once without dropping them. How many could you carry? He asked. 3.5. He looked genuinely confused. Abigail grinned. The 4th one usually won. Even Luca could not hide the amused curve that appeared across his face. Before the moment could settle, Matteo entered the bakery carrying a slim folder. He placed it on the table without opening it. We traced the anonymous documents, he said quietly. Every file originated from a consulting company that only has one client. Abigail looked between the two men. Vanessa? Matteo nodded. Yes, but there is something else. Luca opened the folder himself. Inside were financial records, public filings, and several newspaper articles from nearly 15 years earlier. His eyes paused on one faded photograph before becoming unusually still. Abigail noticed the change immediately. What is it? Luca slowly turned the article toward her. The headline described the bankruptcy of a small family-owned restaurant chain after losing a legal battle against a large hospitality corporation that had once been partially financed by the Romano family. A photograph beneath the article showed a much younger Vanessa standing beside her parents outside a restaurant with its windows covered by foreclosure notices. Abigail looked back at Luca. Your family, he answered honestly. Indirectly. Matteo added quietly. Vanessa's father lost everything during that lawsuit. He suffered a heart attack less than a year later. Abigail stared at the old newspaper, suddenly seeing the woman behind the polished image in an entirely different light. So this is not only about me. No, Luca replied. You became part of a story that started long before either of us met. Abigail looked out the window again, her thoughts racing. If she blames your family. Luca finished the sentence for her. Then hurting the person standing beside me becomes another way to hurt me. Abigail lowered her voice. Maybe I should disappear from your life before she succeeds. Luca held her gaze with calm certainty. Running away from someone else's anger has never healed anything. Before Abigail could answer, Matteo's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time since she had met him, genuine surprise crossed his face. Sir, he said carefully, Vanessa just changed the guest list again. Luca looked up. How? Matteo swallowed once. She has announced that the gala will end with a live charity auction, and the featured guest joining her on stage will be Abigail Brooks. Saturday evening arrived beneath a sky brushed with deep blue and gold as black luxury cars lined the entrance to the Whitmore Foundation Gala. Television cameras stretched across the sidewalk while reporters eagerly described every famous guest stepping onto the red carpet. Abigail adjusted the sleeves of the elegant navy dress Linda had insisted she borrow from a kind neighbor. It was simple, comfortable, and unmistakably her. She glanced toward Luca. Everyone else looks like they walked out of a magazine. Luca looked at her for a quiet moment before answering. They look expensive. You look genuine. She smiled nervously. That sounds suspiciously better. He offered his arm. It is. Together they entered the ballroom where crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny lights across polished marble floors. Conversations softened the instant guests recognized Abigail. Some smiled politely. Others whispered behind raised glasses. Hidden among those whispers were countless phones quietly recording every movement. Vanessa Whitmore welcomed donors from the center of the room wearing another flawless white gown, greeting each guest with practiced warmth until her eyes found Abigail. A perfect smile appeared. There she is, Vanessa announced brightly, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. The woman everyone has been talking about. Cameras immediately turned toward Abigail. She instinctively stepped half a pace behind Luca before catching herself and standing tall again. Vanessa approached with graceful confidence. Thank you for accepting my invitation, she said sweetly. I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Abigail answered politely. I came because you invited me. Vanessa's smile widened almost imperceptibly. Wonderful. I hope tonight helps everyone understand each other better. The words sounded generous, yet something beneath them felt carefully sharpened. Throughout dinner, Abigail noticed small details that refused to fit together. Reporters seemed to know exactly where she would stand before every photograph. Questions from interviewers always returned to the same topic. How does it feel to become famous overnight? Do you believe you deserve all this attention? Is your friendship with Mr. Moretti real? Each conversation gently nudged her toward becoming the evening's spectacle instead of its guest. Luca answered nothing for her. Whenever microphones turned toward him, he calmly redirected every question back to the charity itself. His restraint confused reporters who expected dramatic headlines. After dessert, Vanessa stepped onto the stage as applause filled the ballroom. Behind her, enormous screens displayed photographs of hospitals, shelters, and community programs funded by donations. Tonight, she announced warmly, we celebrate compassion. The audience applauded again. Compassion means seeing value where others see limitations. She turned toward Abigail with theatrical kindness, which is why I would like to invite Abigail Brooks onto the stage. Hundreds of eyes followed Abigail as she slowly stood. Luca remained seated, watching quietly. Abigail climbed the steps with steady breathing, reminding herself that fear only grew louder when ignored. Vanessa welcomed her with a gentle embrace that felt strangely cold. You have inspired millions, Vanessa said into the microphone. Despite hardship, despite criticism, despite everything. The audience nodded sympathetically. Then Vanessa continued. So tonight, I thought we could do something extraordinary. A spotlight illuminated Abigail alone. Our donors have agreed to contribute generously toward your mother's medical expenses. Applause erupted. Abigail blinked in surprise before realizing the giant screens behind her had changed. Her mother's medical records, insurance denial, and private financial struggles now appeared across the ballroom for every guest to see. The applause faded into stunned silence. Abigail's face lost all color. She had never shared those documents with anyone. Vanessa placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder while maintaining the same perfect smile. There is no shame in accepting charity, she said gently. Sometimes people simply need to know their place. Before Abigail could find her voice, a chair quietly scraped against the ballroom floor. Every head turned as Luca Moretti rose from his table and began walking toward the stage with calm, deliberate steps that somehow made the entire room feel smaller. Luca climbed the final step without hurry, his attention fixed only on Abigail. The ballroom had become so quiet that the faint hum of the chandeliers seemed unusually loud. Abigail stood motionless beneath the spotlight, her mother's private records glowing across the enormous screens behind her. She wanted to disappear, yet she refused to lower her head. Luca stopped beside her before turning calmly toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice steady enough to reach every corner of the room without effort. Charity without dignity is not kindness. It is performance. No one applauded. No one interrupted. Vanessa kept her polished smile, although her eyes sharpened. I only wanted to help, she replied sweetly. Luca looked at her without anger. Then you should have asked for permission before displaying another family's private medical information. He nodded once toward Matteo, who stepped quietly to the audiovisual control station. Seconds later, the giant screens changed. Instead of Linda's medical records, they displayed email chains, payment receipts, and legal documents showing how Vanessa's public relations company had commissioned the edited viral videos, delivered fabricated reports to corporate executives, and orchestrated the suspension that cost Abigail her job. The room filled with stunned whispers. Vanessa's confident expression finally cracked. Those documents were obtained illegally, she protested. Matteo answered calmly from the side of the stage. No, they were voluntarily provided by 3 former employees after learning how their work had been used. Several reporters immediately began photographing the screens instead of Abigail. Luca stepped toward the microphone once more. Years ago, my family's business decisions contributed to the collapse of your father's restaurant. That pain was real. No document can erase it. But punishing an innocent woman for history she never created does not honor your father. It only creates another victim. Vanessa lowered her eyes for the first time that evening. The anger she had carried for years suddenly looked heavier than victory itself. Security approached quietly, not to create a spectacle, but to escort her away after investigators confirmed the evidence. Before leaving, Vanessa paused beside Abigail. Her voice had lost every trace of performance. You were never the person I hated. Abigail looked at her gently. I know. Months later, spring returned to Chicago with warm sunshine reflecting across the river. The legal investigation concluded with public corrections from the hospitality company, Abigail's full reinstatement, and formal apologies from those who had acted on false information. Instead of returning to her old position, however, Abigail accepted a new role managing community outreach for Romano Hospitality, creating partnerships with neighborhood food pantries and local charities. Linda completed her therapy and walked into every session with growing confidence. Mrs. Jenkins still insisted homemade cookies solved almost everything, and Frank continued telling jokes that somehow became worse every week. One Saturday morning, Abigail stood inside a bright new bakery that had opened with support from a community development program funded by Romano Hospitality. The sign above the entrance simply read Brooks Bakery. Children laughed near the display case while neighbors gathered around fresh cinnamon rolls that disappeared almost as quickly as they came from the oven. Abigail looked up as the front door opened, and Luca walked inside carrying a small paper bag. "You brought pastries to a bakery?" she asked, laughing. "Insurance," he replied, "in case yours were not good." She folded her arms with playful suspicion, and he opened the bag, took one careful bite, considered it thoughtfully, then placed it on the counter. "Yours are much better." Abigail smiled so brightly that several customers quietly smiled with her. Luca reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. The conversations around them slowly faded as he looked directly into her eyes. "The world spent months trying to decide who you were," he said softly. "I never needed the world to answer that question. I already knew." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that reflected the morning sunlight. "Abigail Brooks, would you let me spend the rest of my life laughing at gravity with you?" Tears gathered in her eyes as laughter escaped at the same time. "Only if you promise to keep catching the trays. Always." She slipped the ring onto her finger before embracing him as warm applause filled the bakery. Outside, people passed the windows without cameras, without judgment, without knowing they were witnessing the quiet ending of an extraordinary journey. The internet eventually found a new story to chase. Headlines faded. Viral videos disappeared beneath newer ones. But kindness remained. Respect remained. Love remained. And in a small bakery filled with cinnamon, laughter, and second chances, two people who had once been defined by strangers finally began writing the rest of their story for themselves.